And welcome to this week's episode of The Dental Guys. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm John, the Dental Guy. And Wes, we have been thinking about this one for a long time.
Since probably 2011.
Yeah, a couple of years back. I mean, we've had discussions after discussions about this author going back long before his book was published. And after spending several shows discussing this book, it's a real honor to have him here. So let's bring him in. Dr. Tomas Linkevicius, welcome to the Dental Guys.
Show.
Hello, hi guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show,
really,
Tomas.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. This is a real honor.
Yeah, introduce me like as if I am being very old.
Yeah, that is true. We shouldn't throw the dates
we heard
out,
him for 10 years and now he's here.
Honestly,
yeah. Well, I mean, we're all in the same boat. I mean, we're teaching people, as I know you're teaching. We're going to talk about that later in the show. As we're now at the point in our careers, including you, where we're starting to teach more. It's interesting because now you start to feel a little older, as you see, like you're not the new clinician anymore. Hopefully, it's a strange thing to feel that way because
when you said older and wiser, sometimes years come by themselves.
Oh man,
very true. But it's funny now to have people look back at because I mean, just a few years ago, I'm sure you were in the same boat of just taking in information. And that's actually a great way to kind of start the show because, you've now come full circle from taking in information, studying information, and trying to make some conclusions to then putting that together into this book, which I think a lot of people that are watching this would say that it's really changed a lot about how we look at implant dentistry in a way that has put together really information that was already out there. But the interesting thing about this book is that a lot of the data, especially in some of the earlier chapters and the later chapters as well, comes from your studies, comes from things that you were looking at starting years ago. And I wonder if you could tell us and tell our listeners kind of the story of how this book came to be. We look back at your research from a few years ago, and we see that you developed this interest in soft tissue thickness, for instance, and some interest also in cement. And what we want to know is, why did you start looking at that? What was it? Because at the time, people in especially the implant industry were very focused on connection and platform shifting and surface design. And not a lot of people, really, maybe very few, were talking about this soft tissue thickness being the thing that would influence bone loss. And I know that's just one factor, but what got you thinking that way? And how did that start leading toward, this book coming to be?
Yeah, so let me first say thank you to you about your podcast you did about my book. And it was really funny. I think somebody from US emailed me and said, Thomas, look, these guys are talking about your book. And I listened to a few of the series and, it was like, wow, did I wrote that? I mean, you were discussing, it was like a very interesting experience, and in some places I really meant different thing.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, so if we would start from the beginning, it's interesting story, like always there is a story behind some book or some event or something. So I remember that I got interested in crestal bone stability already in 2004 when I was postgraduate resident in prosthetic dentistry. And I remember that my supervisor gave me the task, so what factors are responsible for crestal bone stability? So you see, it's almost 20 years. I'm now actually working on this task, which I received in 2004. And I remember looking at different factors, like again, similar, like there was no platform switching then. It was like microgap and polished neck. These things have been known for many years. And I remember kind of bumped on the Berglund and Linter paper from 1996, which actually was the first paper in animal study to discuss tissue thickness, that vertically we must also look at this before implant surgery. And I started immediately looking at, so are there any clinical studies? And I found that there were none. And for me, somehow it was like really obvious that, if tissues have different thickness, then they might have explained things which we can now can explain, but could not explain 15 years ago. Like, I think that this all unexplained bone loss, which usually we attributed to compression or to other things, actually were coming from tissue thickness. But the problem was that we did not really evaluate it. There was nothing like, that in your protocol to evaluate tissue thickness. We've been evaluating bone width, bone height, but no tissue thickness. So that was actually my PhD studies topic. And we did almost 2006, I think we started this clinical study, placing 2 implants in a different position and in different soft tissue thickness. And then, we got the results. We published it 2009. In 2010, I published the same paper only with platform switching. That it also platform switching doesn't stop the bone. But like, I don't know what I've been expecting, but like for 3 years, there was nothing, from the doctors or from the conferences. I don't know, maybe I was expecting something too much, but imagine like in 2011, I thought that actually this was not good topic. And I kind of pushed it aside. I put it to the drawer. And we started to do cement studies, because first I was trained as a prosthodontist, and like for 10 years I was only restoring implants. And then we started to make this cement study. And I still remember, like in 2013, I received an email from Stephen Chu from New York. And he was very known, at least, of course, everywhere in the world as well, in our country. And he was writing, look, Thomas, I read your study. I found it very interesting. I indeed think it the same. So he kind of brought this idea back, because it was completely already forgotten in certain way. And after that, we started another studies with thickening of the tissues. If you have thin tissue, then what are the methods to thicken? So I remember I told Stephen this story that he's very much involved in really this becoming a book. And I wrote a thank you acknowledgement in my book for him, because indeed it was like that close that none of this would happen.
Well, I have to tell you a story.
Yeah. Gotta tell it, John.
This, and we put this in the show because I thought it might come up. So this is so crazy that you bring this up. So in 2013, how I discovered your studies, I was at an implant conference learning from Stephen Chu.
Oh, okay. So you know that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it was the craziest thing, because we were at an implant company headquarters, and he was supposed to be talking about how to use this implant company's implant, of course, to, restore. And he makes the statement from the podium. He says, I think that all of this design stuff that we're currently talking about may not matter. And this was, of course, a very controversial thing to say at the implant company. And I had the opportunity to go to dinner with him and a few other people, not just me, but a few other people that night. And I said, okay, hold on. Tell me about it. And he said, there's a guy in Lithuania who's doing some studies, and he emailed me a couple of the papers, and I started reading, and he said, it's changing the way I'm thinking about situations. And he told everyone the second day of that course, he said, I want you to go back to your practice, and I want you to look at these implants that are losing bone, and I want you to look at bite wing radiographs, and I want you to look at if you can see the tissue thickness. I want you to, and he goes, I guarantee you will start seeing these things. And he said, we're never looking at this before. And he said, it's changing everything about the way that I think. And so it's so funny to hear you tell that he was kind of an inspiration, because that was what got us thinking about that. And it's a real disruption to the implant industry. I wonder if you could speak to that, as to how was that received as this information started getting out there? Because it doesn't really as much, it's hard as if you're an implant manufacturer and you hear that these things might not matter, how is that received?
So of course it's we cannot really say that it doesn't matter, because of course all implant design matters, but implant design must be put in the context, and context is biology. So when you say like just blank statement, like conical connection is the most important, well, it depends on what kind of situation you are talking. So, because if you are talking about suprastally placed implant, like up to 2 millimeters below the bone, then I think connection is really important, probably the most important. But if you're talking about the tissue level implant placed 1 millimeter above the bone with completely like external connection, or let's say simple internal connection of the 45 degrees, then the connection stability becomes not important, because it's above the bone and all the movements are above the bone. And if you have thick tissues in that kind of situation, so you will have bone stability. But I think that it's good timing, because finally companies really understood that the education must be really drawn probably to the other side. And I now really don't hear the statements like, at least let's say official, or like this is like our connection is the best, or our platform switching is the best. So it's kind of, I think doctors are already educated enough to understand that this is the complex tissue. And I see a lot of companies really saying, for example, I lectured for some companies and I said, look, but I don't have like any slide of your to show. Say, it doesn't matter. You just talk about the concept and people will get it. So I had it like with several companies. I did that, and I standing and saying, look, I'm speaking completely independent here. You will see a lot of different brands in my X-rays, but the message is like this. So I think it's kind of a little bit adapting, and probably now even would not be I don't know. I feel kind of like a bad tone to say, like, to start to push like 20 years ago. Then it was like, oh, this is the magic implant. It goes and you never lose the bone. I think these days are already the past, and we will not return to that. But yeah.
Well, one of the things that we noticed is that in different countries that the book is published in, as far as in America, there's one implant design that's featured on the cover. But in other countries, there are other implants featured on the cover. And I really appreciated that. because what that helps you to understand from a reader's perspective is that there's not one, there's not one implant that you're favoring. You're really implant agnostic, but your design choice, right? And what you have in your toolbox to understand what design features influence my surgery. Maybe you could speak to some basic design features that we should look for in an implant. I know that's a wide subject because there's several chapters just on that. But what are some basic features today, knowing that we're doing a lot of immediates and we're doing a lot of, full arch treatment, and what can we look for in implant design?
Yeah, so let's then talk about the implant, which is like on the cover here. So this one, and it's as you rightly mentioned, the qualities or design features depends on how the implant will be used. So we have a platform switching implant with conical connection and no polished surface. So I think for subcrestally placed implant, this is 3 major things should be incorporated into the design. So first of all, conical connection, and conical connection no more than 20 degrees. Because if you look at different implants, they have different conical connections. So again, just saying, is conical connection important? The question is, what kind of conical connection? Because we can have like conical connection from 5 degrees to 45 degrees. So again, it's a huge distance, yeah? So I think it should be like up to 20 degrees, and that kind of implant can be placed subcrestally or at the level of the bone, meaning that the movement which are always present will not really harm the bone. And especially if we're placing immediate cases, we are always subcrestal, we're deep subcrestal, and it's better in immediate cases to be more deep than more shallow, because we can solve the deepness of implant. I mean, there are different things, but if the implant is placed too shallow, then it's a real problem. And sometimes you need even to remove the implant because you don't have emergence profile, and that's all. So conical connection, platform switching, again for the bone, and third requisite is polished neck. I really believe that polished neck is actually a feature if we're talking about bone level implants from the past, because in the past all implants had polished neck, and doctors were advised to place them at the level of the bone, meaning that the polished neck goes below the bone and it resorbs. And then people were saying, oh, look, wow, how good that we have polished neck. Now it's resorbed and it's not rough surface which will be open. Imagine if we had rough surface. So my answer is that it's like predicting yourself a failure. So don't place that implant with polished neck below the bone, and you won't have that bone resorption. So right. it's like that.
Right, exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
How many times do we say that, always, John?
Yeah, we will always have a guarantee of bone. So let me, before we move on, because that's such a, I don't know, it shouldn't be controversial. And yet we see even now new implant designs coming out where there is a polished bevel or a polished collar. And you will hear people say that the reason for that is because if we lose that bone, right, is always the if we lose that bone and we develop a peri-implantitis situation,
here we go.
That's a more cleansable surface. So how do you respond to that? Because we hear that a lot.
I respond to this like, if you can clean your implant neck, so your implant is dead. Because you should,
That's great.
you should not clean that surface because it's protected by the tissue. So if you have tissue adherence or adhesion, or how we call it, it's another issue. So if you can clean the surface with a brush, it's over, because it means it was already exposed. I never want to clean my polished neck implant surface, because if I cannot clean it, means that it's in the bone, it's in the tissue, it's glued to the surface, and that's also, again, this is just, repeatable phrase which sounds logical, but it's not logic. Because sure, we assume that if it's smooth, we will clean it better. We all imagining some smooth car, with smooth surface, and we can clean it. And imagine the surface of the car is rough, it's more difficult. So that's analogy we connect implant, but it's not like that. We can discuss maybe the influence of rough and smooth surface on the tissues. That's another topic. Yeah, that's maybe would be more correctly to discuss, but not for cleansability. I mean, it's nonsense. It's just not understanding, what's happening.
There seems like, and there seems like there's still a lot of disconnect between different methods of trying to treat peri-implantitis, and we'll not get into that, but it seems like we're chasing something here, when really what the book talks about is, let's prevent the bone loss so we don't have to treat peri-implantitis, because I think we're a long ways from being able to successfully, predictably come up with some protocol to treat peri-implantitis with roughened surfaced implants and even polished surfaces. I mean, we see case studies on that, but your book speaks to, hey, let's not go to peri-implantitis, right?
Yeah, the best treatment is prevention. It's best treatment, no treatment, is prevention. But let's say, in my own experience, the biggest steps in preventing peri-implantitis were actually prosthetic things, not implant design things, and not, let's say, implant surgery. Although I'm saying this is as equally as important as prosthetics, but let's say my experience. I had two big switches in my practice. So first one was when I switched from cement to screw-retained restorations. So after graduation, for 5-6 years, I was only cementic restorations, and saying, oh, this is so easy, great. I mean, you don't need to prep the tooth, and the technician is doing everything. But then we had really a lot of problems. Like every week, I remember, every week there was something like with the fistula, with some bleeding, with something. So then we did these cement studies. Actually, those were initiated by my own poor experience. So I kind of took my bad work, made a studies and turned it into something good. And so that one. The next thing was switching from glazed surfaces, from metal ceramic to zirconia below the tissues. And now, I can, put my hand on my heart. People don't believe, but I don't really remember when I had peri-implantitis of these recent cases. I mean, when the implant is placed in a good position, according to design, when you have thick tissues and screw-retained and zirconia below the tissues.
Just don't run into the problem. Let me ask back to this design, because this is such a common thing we are hearing. I had a great question the other day from somebody that knew we were going to be having you on the show, and the question was, given abundant bone and abundant tissue in the posterior, We know that based upon the book and the studies that are in that book, that you can go the direction of a bone level implant, as you said, with a conical connection, with platform shifting, roughened surface, or you could go the direction of a tissue level implant with the understanding that you're placing the polished collar into the tissue area.
Yes.
Can you discuss why you might choose one approach over the other? If a clinician's trying to decide, how many, essentially people are asking the question, how many implants do I need to have in my armamentarium? Mm-hmm. Do I need to have multiple designs available? And when would I choose tissue level over bone level if you, assuming that the tissue conditions and bone conditions are good?
Yeah. So the answer would be here that my preference would be bone level, but purely from prosthetic point of view, because as a prosthodontist, I like to have freedom how I restore. Let's say you have a high bone, wide bone, and you don't need to let's say make compromise because, for example, if you have like not available bones, so let's say Straumann short implants has only tissue level as a tissue level, so you must use those in those situations. But if put that all aside, I like the feeling that I can control my position of the prosthetic margin. And with tissue level, I cannot do that because it's already predetermined. So you have the neck and you cannot get away from it. And again, this is my personal view. I'm not saying that, if those who are using tissue level are some kind of, doing not the best, if it works, if you don't have any perimplantitis or cement related issues, you're doing through retained. So keep doing that. But if you have those issues, then you probably should look at that. Because I really think that you can control bone stability around bone level implant by choosing a right titanium base height, by choosing polished zirconia, because actually we have proof now that to say that zirconia is better material than titanium for the tissues. Now, does it always translate to the bone stability? No, such data is not yet published. But we can really say that for the tissues, for the soft tissues, meaning pink aesthetic score, probing depths, and bleeding on probing, zirconia is better compared to titanium. So that would be my answer.
The one thing that I think that it is true, and the way you speak about zero bone loss concepts, even on the show today, is that there's a marriage between what you're doing surgically and what you're doing restoratively, and that contributes to the factor of zero bone loss concepts, and it's of multiple variables. And one thing that I'd like for you to speak on, and you made this comment in the book that the best, I don't know that you said the best, but in my confirmation bias, right, my confirmation bias would be that the best implant outcomes come with someone that has a true understanding of what's possible restoratively. And I think that's a connection that's really started to take off a little bit here in our area, is that understanding that restoratively it helps to drive our surgeries. And we think, well, that's been around for years. Well, honestly, it hasn't, because up until 2015 in the United States, oral surgeons and periodontists placed most of the implants. Now that's contrasting to most of the world. Most dentists are trained to place dental implants, but in the U.S., it was favored up until 2015. Now, restoring doctors in our country are placing more implants on a whole as restoring doctors, they're placing them. And so what I would like you to speak to is, like, you mentioned this, and how does this really help, right? Understanding the restorative aspect. You've already spoken to it some, but how much of an impact does it have?
The book was released in June 2019, so like almost a year ago. And I really now understand, only now I begin to understand why it really touched so many hearts of people. And one of the reasons is actually combination of surgery and prosthetics into one book. Because initially, again, the story, initially with Quintessence, we were discussing to write two separate books, surgical factors and prosthetics. And now I understand that would be a mistake if we would do that. But like at the end of the day, I was thinking and I made a decision, like from financial point of view, from business point of view, it would be better to have two separate books. Yeah? And in total, it would be probably, let's say, more financially better in terms of buying. But I understood that this must come together, because if we're talking about that these factors are inseparable, so it must be in one book. How can you then say that they are not separate? You cannot be separate if you publish two different books. So you separate them already. So that was, I think, that was the good decision which I made to put it into one. And to further answer your question about, I really believe that, as I wrote in summary or at the end of the book, that a surgeon who does not have, let's say, thinking of prosthodontics, is difficult to give the best treatment to the patient, and vice versa. I gained much more respect for surgical specialty when I started to place the implants myself. Because before that, I was restoring and always complaining, why is that? Now, when you did it yourself, you start to understand that it's not that always easy, but you start to predict your success from the beginning. So I think that US is a kind of unique situation. You are right that, for example, in all of the Europe and also in Lithuania, in my country, a majority of the implants are placed and restored by same doctors. Of course, difficult cases and these maxillofacial surgeries are done by the surgeons. But here is the trick, that sometimes when the, let's say, augmentation is such big, you kind of tend to forget about the small thing as tissue thickness or small thing of cement. It doesn't really kind of matter to you, because look, I just rebuild the bone, it was not possible, and now the patient can have. These things go, let's say, to the second row, but at the end of the day, I think they should not, especially then, as I said, my let's say, what I give is a knowledge. It's actually not a technique. When you go to some course of surgeon and you do an hands-on, and you really learn the technique. Here are almost no techniques, but like in, vertical augmentation, you have the membrane, which like everybody can do. Here is actually synthesis of knowledge and explanation. So I think that it's important. And then when the surgery, I had, like in US, several doctors who were placing only implants, and they start to, because it's good for them as well, because let's say you place the implant, the doctor restores it, and then you have perimplantitis. Now, who's to blame? Orthodontist will say, look, the implant was bad from the beginning. The surgeon will say, oh, you just ruined my work, I gave you like very good implant. And there should not be a detective story here, because it's really clear with every step, and we can find, say, what happened. But these things now can be really avoided, and there are methods how to do it.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that, especially as we started seeing more of this knowledge coming out, that you start to look at what all is involved in just a simple, quote unquote, anterior immediate implant placement and temporization. If you want to do that really well, you have to understand so much of where we're going to end up with the prosthetic result, and not only the three-dimensional placement of the implant, but how do you preserve the tissue that you have, and classify the socket properly, and understand what your implant design is giving you and what it doesn't have. And that's one of the things that's got Wes and I into more placement of dental implants, even though we were initially more in the restorative phase, I think. But as you said, you start to respect more what your surgeons are dealing with, for sure. And in some cases brings you back to, I sent this book to a couple of my surgeons and said, hey, this is where we need to be heading. And it is a challenge, though. Together. That's right. It's a challenge because in a busy practice, like you say, you just augmented this huge amount of bone and tissue, and look how nice this is. And yes, that's right. And if the implant is, a little bit too high, well, look at all that we accomplished, though. And then the result is less than perfect. And these are situations where sometimes we get into the pink porcelain discussions and these, black triangle issues. And oftentimes it was just a matter of not understanding of both teams, not understanding what the limitations were. And I think that this is, like you say, it's not really a technique book. It's just it's a knowledge book. It's an understanding of what's possible.
Yep.
And I think it's interesting that the reason, because for years, many people were very skeptical about immediate implants, right? And there was a big discussion about whether this would even work. And we started seeing these really great outcomes. And I think it's interesting now that we look at your book and we talk about thickness of tissue and we talk about where to ideally place implants. It's interesting to me that is often where we were placing our immediate implants, right? Is the reason that immediate implants work so well because we were already placing them. Yes. Speak to that a little bit, because that's something that I think you've kind of found out kind of through the back door, if you will. It's like it wasn't what you were we didn't understand why these things were working until we maybe understood the biology.
So I would begin if we discuss immediate implants that, when you place the immediate implant, implant does not have biological width. So that first thing we must understand. When if you have healed ridge, you also do not have biological width, but you have tissues. So you have tissue thickness, you can predict, you can augment, you cannot augment, that, you are in control. While in immediate implant placement, you have a hole. So there was a tooth and tooth is out. So you have a socket, no biological width, no vertical tissue thickness, because it does not exist yet. And here we must really differentiate two things. And I kind of started in my book that you have vertical tissue thickness and you also have horizontal tissue thickness. And that's very crucial, because in anterior case, of course, horizontal tissue thickness, I think, is kind of more important if we would compare to posterior jaw, because in posterior, this horizontal tissue thickness, I think it's really does not really play a big role. But if I go back to immediate implant case, so your biological width or your vertical protection depends only on one thing: how deep you will place the implant. Because if you place 2 millimeters below the tissue level, you will have 2 millimeters. So that's why I tend to place at least 4 millimeters from the buccal margin, which leaves us, of course, more deeper if we compare to interproximal. Yes. But in anterior case, I think aesthetics and the contour and tissue thickness horizontally, it plays. Let's say I would have rather, let's say, implant with a little bit of bone loss but good horizontal tissue thickness in anterior case than implant with zero bone loss but like thin horizontal tissues. Yep. But both things are here achievable, and as I said in my book, we don't need to choose. You can have, but your implant position depends. It really determines your soft tissue height and how your tissues will be height in vertical direction.
I think one of the things that you'll learn whenever you start placing implants with respect to hard and soft tissues, that you have to use a periodontal probe to be able to accurately and precisely place these implants. And one of the things that, if you're listening to this and you're not, not a placer, but you're a restoring doc, one thing I would encourage you to do is go to your surgeon's office, but because one of the best things that I ever did before I got into placing implants for about the first 5 years of my career, I kind of put that on hold until my practice got going, is I would go right next door, which I was fortunate enough to have a surgeon next door to me, and he would invited me into the operatory and to help collaborate, on the position of the dental implant with respect to bone and soft tissue. One of the things, too, I want us to kind of stick with this soft tissue notion here for a minute, Tomas and John, is John and I recently took a course from Dr. Pat Allen, and it was on soft tissue augmentation. We primarily took that course because of your research and the fact that we need to have that in our toolbox, to be able to augment the soft tissue. And one thing that he talked about is that this idea of what you're talking about here is keratinized versus non-keratinized tissue. The mucogingival junction, where that's at in the anterior, is so important. And he talked about that as a periodontist, it really doesn't matter if it's keratinized. It matters if it's dense, fibrous, laid down tissue. I want you to speak to that. Speak to that.
Sorry interrupted, but I agree. It must be immobile. If it does not move, then, and again here I like the analogy. Now let's think about adhesion and how tissues glue to the surface of the restoration. And if it's moving, it means not sufficient tissues, so you will never have this adhesion. And probably even zirconia won't save you if the tissues will be moving. So I look at this area, I agree with Dr. Pat Allen that this should be fibrous and not mobile. We don't need a keratinization there as a must be. So that really gives you the stability, not mobility. And that is one of the factors which should be. But of course, here again, we must go back to tissue thickness because, and still now, a lot of clinicians tend to mix it together, saying that talking about vertical tissue thickness and having in mind keratinized tissues or this part. So vertical tissue thickness and attached tissues are two different factors. Why it's so easy to mix them because both of them have vertical factor. Because only crestal tissue thickness or vertical tissue thickness is measured at the top of the crest, while if you go more buccally, you are still having this vertical dimension, but it's already on the buccal or lingual side. So then this is attached or keratinized or immobile tissues. So that's why still up to date, people say that, okay, yeah, I understand you need thick tissue, so that's why I always do keratinized. And I say, no, we are talking about different areas of the dentulous ridge, and both of them need to be in certain dimensions. And what I really understood during these lecturing years, that we all need numbers. And I kind of came up with a nice sentence like, what is the work or job of scientists? Scientists must turn the feeling into numbers, because everybody has feeling. Like, I've been doing this for 20 years and I have feeling that this works or it does not work. Okay, you have to now translate this feeling to me. Like, let me feel it.
Right.
Impossible.
Right.
But if you say 2, 3, 1, okay, now I understand you. Yeah, so that's why we need numbers in what we talk about.
Dentists like quantification, and that you can quantify implant dentistry. I've taught that for years. You have to, if you're going to use,
especially when you're teaching.
When you're teaching,
there's nothing worse than watching an artist just describe his work as art. I mean, it's great. I love to watch it, but I can't translate that into my practice because it seems impossible. It seems like a black box. And once you start having numbers, we can have a goal to shoot for, and that's what we all need, or else it becomes just an art, and that's not translatable.
Yes, and this from where this this saying, I'm sure you heard it it works in my hands. Yeah, I heard it so many times.
I hate
now. Give me your hand, okay? Give me your hand. Of course,
that's right.
Of course, our specialty, we must have like hands, like we should do things. But when we talk about, so how deep? Okay, I can tell you 1 millimeter, 2. How tissue thickness? 3 millimeters, 4. Not, I feel that it's already thick enough. So
Yeah. So to finish up the soft tissue argument, right? But to finish up the discussion here is, I think there's a lot of promise from what I've been studying and reading and what you presented in the book on allodermis tissue and in this grafting exercise and concept where we need to thicken the tissue when the tissue is not sufficiently thick to be able to place the implant. And you speak of even xenografts, and even Dr. Pat Allen, the reason why we took his course is because he is using alloderm instead of doing free gingival grafts solely, and has been for 20 years, and which is great for the patient. And I noticed in your book you're using xenografts, which he talked about a product that will be FDA approved here soon in the United States that he feels like as a xenograft material will replace the alloderm that he's been using for the last 20 years. Speak a little bit about the ability to use these products instead of grafting from the palate and what results you're seeing.
We started with the study, the use of these soft tissue graft substitutes. Because I remember when we discussed with my colleague Algirdas Puišys, who is a surgeon, and actually he was one of them working in this field. And I remember we talked about, okay, so we have thin tissues. So what do you do about it? Okay, let's graft them. And I remember I looked at one study which actually was using soft tissues from the palate, and I found that they had even more bone loss before the grafting. Later, I got an explanation because it happened not because of grafting, but because of the poor implant position. But I learned it only later. So that's why we decided, okay, let's go for soft tissue substitutes. And that time, the first soft tissue substitute which we're using, it was 2010. It was alloderm from Horizons. And we started to use this in two-stage surgeries. And later we switched to xenografts, porcine xenografts, which allow to make this procedure of vertical tissue thickening in one stage. I mean, you can do two-stage always, but we all know if alloderm gets exposed, it becomes really not nice experience. So that's why we, in one-stage surgeries, we did porcine xenografts. And I think that here we must distinct, again, two types of tissue thickness and regions of the mouth. So I'll start from posterior. Now, if we have posterior and we have thin tissues vertically, and let's say you have some invagination, a little bit of defect on the buccally, so we never take soft tissue graft. We take a soft tissue substitute and augment it vertically and also horizontally. Now, if we move, of course, to anterior region, then again, probably, again, situation changes a little bit. Then soft tissue grafts from palate done in a good way, depithelialized, because if you leave epithelium, that's another challenge, and you might have even more bone loss than you expected, is also a good option. I think where we still don't have a really good alternative is for making of attached tissues or immobile tissues. Here we need still use soft tissue grafts from autogenous grafts to achieve this kind of stability. But I don't see, the war between which is better. I think from the patient side and also from the material side. Let's say, imagine you have really thin tissues and need to place 4 implants, like short implants, and you need to graft all of them. So you will cut all the palate of the patient. And here the soft tissue substitutes or allografts or xenografts really come to the service of you, like tissues from the shelf. So I don't see here any, you'd say, like war between them. What we really know, that in the aesthetic area, I think soft tissue grafts really are more aesthetic. They will maintain better volume because soft tissue substitutes, they will stay the best as we put them. Probably they will shrink a little bit. While tissues, connective tissues, they have tendency a little bit maybe to grow with time. So that's my position on this part.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a great kind of clarification to say that, it's we can't just leave connective tissue grafting in the past. We need to have the knowledge for both techniques. And as we kind of are coming to a close, respect your time, I think there's another question. One might be maybe final question that has really been kind of goes back a little bit to implant design. It's been kind of burning a little bit for Wes and I, and that has been we mentioned earlier that if you are looking at implant design, that there are these factors that you would prefer, and then we talked about immediates and the fact that depth is your factor. And you said, I think very rightly, of course, that if you want to err on one side, err on the side of being a little deeper, because you can have more, you can control things in a more positive way. So coming back to implant design and kind of putting that all together, there are clinicians that are placing polished collar implants as immediates using that same type of approach. They're placing it, below tissue, below bone, super deep, oftentimes, as you said, interproximally. Do you see a time when that is going to work out well? I guess we're seeing this oftentimes in the United States, where there's the same approach that you said earlier, as far as the connection becomes incredibly important, the surface becomes incredibly important. you would use the same type of implant design for your anterior mediates, I would guess, that you mentioned earlier. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. My comment would be here, again, it depends on how high we raise our success level. Because it would be false to say that if you place this like immediate implant with polished neck, these implants do not integrate. Yeah, they integrate probably the same as implants without polished neck. So in terms of implant success or failure, it's probably the same. But when you start to measure bone loss, then you obviously see the difference, because and this was not invented by me. Like that polished neck does not integrate. It's been old, like implants, from 30 years ago. It was already clear, and it's explained that the stress cannot distribute to this polished part. That's why this is like a passive bone dieback. And again, this is kind of philosophical way that, okay, if you can accept this, like this polished neck bone loss, and you don't see the further amount of implant failure, well, it's up to you. But in my opinion, there is a way not to have it. And if it's the way not to have it, so why don't we just do it? And to have additional 2 millimeters of bone, I think won't harm the patient.
Bone is good.
I'd say that's probably probably won't harm anybody. That's for sure.
So I think as we kind of conclude here, one of the things I think I saw come across my social media feed was something amazing, and Tomas is committed to training people in these ideas of zero bone loss concepts. And we have a short video that we'd like to share with you, and then Tomas is going to comment on the video and what is going in behind the scenes on this next level training that you can receive via webinar, from what I understand, which is amazing. And so I'm going to play the video, and then we're going to bring Tomas back on and talk a little bit about what's went into this and what you can expect when you take the course. So here we go.
Hello. My name is Tomas Linkevicius, and I am excited to announce the first online course of zero bone loss concepts. Yes, you heard it right. Online course, how to develop and how to maintain crestal bone stability. A lot of information is presented in my bestseller and during live courses I do all over the world. However, it's not possible to reach everybody. So guess what? I am bringing zero bone loss concepts right to you. You will be able to study these amazing principles when you want, where you want, and as much as you want. Sounds interesting? Find out more on my webpage and see you online.
Whoa. That's all I got to say.
The music gets me pumped up.
I got chill bumps up my spine. That's how, you know what? Tomas asked us in the pre-show, he was like, do you all miss practicing? Yes, we miss practicing
that.
I mean, we want to go back to work and apply this stuff, right? Tomas,
so talk about how can people connect with that? You know, how can they get involved if they want to take that training?
Yeah, so first of all, they need to go to my website, tomaslinkevicius.com. And we're still now in the process of finishing some details. So the course is not available yet. However, they can register and they will get notification right away to their email with a link when they could start learning. I had this idea in general, for some time, because when you travel, when you speak, when you make courses, there's always this, distance, because of course it matters. I mean, let's say you have some problem, but for you to take out, let's say, 3 or 4 days out of your practice, or to travel and to hotel stay away from your friends and family. I mean, these things sometimes let people say, okay, maybe I don't need that anymore. So that I had the idea to really bring this to your desktop or to your screens. And the course is actually really very similar, almost identical to I do live course, like when people really come to the course. We have 10 lectures, so practical, theoretical part, 5 lectures in surgery, 5 lectures in prosthetics. And then we have 2 hands-on sessions when I really explain here more than I do in my hands-on course, where I usually show one of the techniques to how augment vertical tissue thickness. So here I put all 4 of them, how to augment tissues vertically, so they can see on the animal model everything very precisely. Also, I had this idea, okay, so what could be missing between me sitting at home here and somebody watching video online? So of course, this possibility to ask the question. So we incorporated into software, like you can ask any question anytime you want. So you're watching something, okay, you have the question, you type it. Of course, I probably won't be able to answer it right away as I would do on a live course, but I assure you, I receive all these emails and then we answer them, and then finally you, of course, will get your answer. Of course, also all the papers published, all hands-on sessions, handouts will be available as well. So I kind of really excited. I worked, we worked like for 2 months to get this thing together. And it won't be like, just, standing me there near the screen and somebody's filming with like, old camera, when, you thought maybe on this promo, it will be really interactive. I will be like, discussing very nice pictures. And I think it's, when I watched all this, everything connected together, I said, okay, finally I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, you're obviously, one thing I've appreciated about your approach, and this comes through in the book, is it's modern, and I think, Wes and I talk about this so much that, we need to understand where we were 20 years ago in order to understand where we are today. But new approaches can be done better, not only in the way the book is written, but in the way we teach. And I think that's no more appropriate than today, when we're all, in the last couple of months, there's been a ton of innovation happening with learning, and it's exciting. I mean, and you're obviously taking advantage of some of that and incorporating the idea that you could, ask a question during the presentation and then have that question followed up on later. That's it's as close as it gets to being there, in a live setting. It's kind of a combination of the live course and, watch on demand. And I can tell from the promo that, like you said, it's going to be a modern approach even to the presentation. So I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to tap into who have either heard this or have read the book and want to really see more of the hands-on, at least watch how some of these things, because many of us are visual in the way that we learn. And so seeing some of these things done is huge.
And of course, it's like what I like about it, that you can, as they said in the promo, that you can watch it where you want, as much as you want. And I mean, it can repeat it, and you would be just, you can have this lecture all 24/7. And it's sometimes really good because you kind of tend to forget things, that I receive after people come to my course, You answer them, and suddenly after 2 months, I see the email from the person I remember asking the question, and he's asking the same question because he maybe, he didn't put it down or forgot. Or so these videos, online course will give you I think a better in-depth understanding of zero bone loss concept.
Yeah, well, we're excited for this coming out. I think it's going to be a great resource, and so definitely go check out the website as he mentioned, and get in line for when the course becomes available. We're going to be having another show tomorrow. I just want to give you a little. We haven't really talked about this, but we've got a couple of folks coming on from Spear Education, who's one of the the big dental education providers here in the U.S. We're going to be talking to Greg Kinzer and Bob Winter about some of the prosthetic concepts from the book. So those who are watching right now and kind of are finding this to be useful, join us again tomorrow, and we'll be talking some more about kind of what this changes about how you communicate to your lab, for instance, on polishing zirconia and tie-based design. And, these are going to be some high-level clinicians that are going to be kind of unpacking the communication side of it even more, because this is having just wide-ranging impacts on our profession. And so we really appreciate you being here with us today. It's been an awesome time.
I love you guys.
Yeah. that makes our whole.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, hopefully, when all this thing will be over, I will come to US and let's meet somewhere and have a beer.
We'd love it.
Yes, sign me up for that for sure. Or maybe one day we can come and check your place out too. That would be pretty amazing. It's a place we haven't been before, and we'd love to check it out. Yeah, so if you've been listening to this. Yeah, that's what I would imagine. Yeah. So if you've enjoyed this, if this has brought value to your daily practice, to your learning, give us some feedback on that. Of course, give Tomas some feedback as well, and get involved with him. But let us know what you thought. Leave us some comments, some feedback, and really importantly too, reviews are super helpful for us. If you go to Apple Podcasts, this of course will be re-released as an audio and video in the coming weeks, so you'll be able to go back and re-listen through this if you like. Those reviews are super helpful to get our message out and let people know what we're doing and what we're up to at the Dental Guys. And, let us know if you want more content like this. This is the kind of thing we're passionate about, as you guys know, is bringing you the highest level that we can get of the clinicians and the research and the data, and translate that into your practice to where it makes an immediate impact. So we appreciate everybody joining us from around the world. We've had people from all over the world checking in with us on this live stream today. It's great to see that international audience. Obviously, this book has had an international impact, and we're very, very honored to have Tomas on the show today. So for Tomas, for Wes, I'm John, and this has been a great episode of The Dental Guys.
And we're off.
Oh, man.